Today I'd like to show you a little bit of LogiX, which is the visual scripting language within Neos. It allows you to do some logic with these sort of nodes that you can move around spatially. And with that, you can affect various things, such as text. You could change the text, or you could use it to set the rotation of objects, many different things. Programming, scripting within Neos visually. So this one is going to be a little bit like a web app. What I have is a Node.js app running, and what this is doing is using this getString node in order to get a string from this URL and write it to a string variable. This is the result that we get from that URL. So the Node app, I can share that. I'll share that in the comments. You can kind of take a look at what that's doing, but it's really just spitting out a string at a particular endpoint. So I'm going to rebuild this and give you an idea of what it's like to do a little bit of LogiX within Neos. So these nodes, so the LogiX tool, I have this from my tool chain here. I have it sitting, and I just pull it off of there. You can also find this in your inventory under the Neos tools. But this little blue tool is your LogiX tooltip. When you equip that, you get a new radial menu item for the node selector. So if we select that, we get a nice little window with various types of nodes and actual nodes. The blue ones are actual node selections. These are groupings. The main one we want for this purpose is the getString. This is kind of the brains of the operation here, and that's under network tools. This is a little bit limited right now in that you can only get a string from a URL. There will be full REST API support within Neos at some point here. But for now, we're kind of limited to just getting a string and doing some parsing with it or whatnot. So in order to select one of these, just double click on it, and you'll see your tooltip change to getString. Double clicking with your controller trigger will pull up that node. So each one of these little color pieces are connectors, and if you hover over one, it tells you what it's expecting. White is kind of a pulse. That's the actual execution of the function. GetString is basically just a function, and it wants a URL. So we can provide a URL. I'm going to provide a string, and you'll notice here this has a little converter. So it's expecting a URL as a URI type, but we're going to give it a URL. So this app that I had running on my local, I actually have up on Heroku. And what I'm going to do is simply take this, I'm going to touch it, I'm going to grab it with my trigger, I'm going to pull off this node and connect it, and it's going to add a little converter node. So it just basically converts the variable type from a string to a URI, which is what getString function wants as its parameter. Its next parameter that it wants over here is the actual pulse. So I'm going to just pull that off with my trigger, and then I'm going to hit my secondary action, which on the Vive is the thumb pad, and that pulls off a little pulse button. So when I click that, it says, do this, execute this function, and it will execute that function. The next thing I want to do here is I'm going to write that to a string variable. So back on the LogiX node, we're going to go to Actions and then to Write. And this takes any output from this function, and we can use it to write to an actual string. And I'm just going to connect these up. I'm going to touch this, put it over here. You'll see the type changes. And I'm going to take the pulse, take that over to the write function. For this bottom one, this is on done. You could have it do another function after it writes, when it's done writing, or you can get it to just kind of indicate when the pulse is off. So I'm going to pull this out, hit my secondary action, no impulse, it says, because we haven't run this function yet. We haven't run the get string. We haven't run the write operation. To write this operation into a string, I'm going to go back to Logic Nodes, go to variables, because we want to populate this variable. This would be kind of doing something like if you were doing JavaScript and you wanted to say var string equals something, you're going to create a string. You're going to hook it up, and it's going to save that into the string variable. Now, if I pull this off in my secondary action, by default, it does a display node. This is a display node. This is a display node. Just displays whatever's coming out of the from the output. So now that we have this, let's see. I've got my URL. I'm actually going to do an endpoint. Let's see. Latest. Enter. And let's see what happens. Cross your fingers. Bam, there it goes. So the pulse came through. It says last pulse from circuitry, total 1, the global index. And what it did is it took the result from getString and it wrote it to the string variable, and it's displaying the variable. So if you actually put this URL into your browser, this is the number you'll see. Actually, that changes fairly quickly. Like if I pulse again, it's going to be incremented, and it's up to 82, 83, 84. So you can get an indication, this number is changing pretty much a lot. The Node app is actually calling, when you look at that, it's actually calling data from a REST API, just formatting it into a string, giving it an endpoint, which we're calling into Neos with getString, writing it to a string variable. And that's it. That's kind of some basics of LogiX, and in particular, how to get data from a REST API or a middleware, as I've written here. Thanks for watching.